Okay, so if the question answered is true, we can tell them they got it correct. So if is correct, and we're already showing them visually, but we can also reinforce that. We can put it in, we have this message up here. And so let's add it there. So I'll say, we need a reference to this, of course. So we'll just copy one of these and paste it. And let's call this our message. So this is kind of like console.log, except it's for the actual user. So we're giving them a message. So we'll say message. And so if it's correct, we'll say message.textContent, correct. And else, we'll say, we can just say nope, or whatever. You could give a more elaborate message there. And so once they've done that, let's add the next button. So let's actually move this guy down here. And so I'll take it out of here for now. We'll see how that looks. Okay, so we start the quiz. One thing that happens is if I don't have a button here, that text kind of jumps up. Let's see why that is. This is kind of like an annoying CSS thing. This is one reason why, I don't always love CSS. Okay, so the button is 40 pixels tall because it has some padding. So why don't we just add that same padding to our paragraph. But we really only need it on the top and bottom, so we'll say padding right. Wait, no, top and bottom is first. Oh, that's what we need, top and bottom, and then 0. So hopefully that, no, it still bounces. What else does the button have? Okay, the font size is the same. Oh, it has this border, which is 2 pixels. So we'll have to include that in the paragraph. Or I could just make the whole interface as big as one of the buttons. If I say the interface height is 40 pixels. Okay, that's going to be easier. That's a little bit of a stopgap for now. So I'm just going to go to the interface, wherever that is, and say height is 40 pixels. So that way we won't see that jump when we click the start quiz. And then if we answer, then we say correct and next question. So that's pretty cool. We'll set up the next question now. We know that it's correct, but we also want to get it wrong, right? We can't click on these guys yet. So we'll finish that part and then we'll go to building the rest of the quiz. And so let's go back to our question and look at how do we deal with the option. So with the option, of course, any option that's not the answer is going to be incorrect. So we can add something similar. We can say option, spell it correctly, add event listener. So click event again, and again an anonymous function. You could take a function and put it somewhere else, but this is going to be fine for now. Again, we want to make sure if not this dot answer attempted. And I think I know what the error I'm going to run into here, which will actually give me a chance to talk about something that's kind of important in JavaScript. So if they haven't attempted the answer yet, then we're going to add to the option. We're going to say option.classList.add wrong answer. And then we'll say this dot answer attempted is true because they attempted the answer. And then we'll say question answered false. And let's put some comments in here because it's starting to get a little crazy. So let's say user chooses wrong option. And user chooses correct option. Okay, so I think there's going to be an error here, and I'm going to go over that in a second, but let's try this first. So, okay, I got the wrong answer. That's exactly what I wanted. But one thing that's going to happen is, yes. One thing that I didn't do a good job with is that my this.attempted is not going to work. And I'll try to explain why very briefly. I'm going to go into single view for a second because there's a lot of code on the screen. So the problem is using this. And this is like a weird JavaScript thing, and I could have avoided this if I had designed this a little more intelligently, but that's okay. Basically, the problem with this is that usually this refers to my class, the instance of this class, and that's why I have this .attempted and this .question container so that I can return this .question container, etc. One issue I'll run into is that if I have a function like this, which is attached to an answer div, all of a sudden this is no longer my question. Let's look at what this is first. So console.log this. So usually this is my question. So we can see question line 17 is console.log this. And so most of the time this is actually the question, right? That's my question. It contains the question container and the answer attempted. Sometimes, however, if we're inside of a event listener, all of a sudden this changes to the thing that we clicked on. So now if I click on a question, this is no longer my question. This refers to my div. And that's something that is super confusing for people who are first starting out with JavaScript, and it creates a lot of issues. So there's a couple ways to fix this. The new way to fix this is to get rid of my regular function and use what's called an arrow function, which is a new JavaScript thing. That is gonna fix my problem, although maybe I have a different problem because I can still click on these. But you can see this is still my question here. So that's one way to do it, but I don't really want to spend a ton of time talking about arrow functions. So what I'm gonna do instead is, as I look at this program, I realize that I don't really need this.answer attempted to be one of my constructor properties. It can just live by itself inside of this constructor function. The reason for that is I can add up the score later. I don't necessarily need to know which answers the user got correctly later on. If I did need to know that, I'd need to move some stuff around, but at the moment I don't need to know that. For now, the easy fix for this is I'm going to change this into a local variable inside of the constructor function. So I'm going to say let answer attempted equals false, and then I'm just going to say not answer attempted, answer attempted equals true. I'm going to do the same thing down here because all of these guys are in the same scope right now. I don't need to make this like a public property of the question. So a lot of this stuff I'm talking about right now is probably more advanced than what we've talked about in the class, but I'm just trying to explain exactly why that wasn't working. So let's try it now. So I got the answer right. Somehow I still got the answer wrong. So let's see what the deal with that is. So I'm just going to console.log answer attempted. Oh, because I put this is not answer attempted. Okay, that was just stupid of me. So if not answer attempted, now it should work. Okay, this is right. And now see, I can't click on my other options. So that's exactly what I wanted. So sorry for that little digression. Hopefully maybe that made a little bit of sense and maybe you learned something. Maybe you've run into that issue on your own at some point, and so maybe that was helpful. So we're really close to the end at this point. We just need to learn how to go to the next question and then how to add up the score at the end. We've added the next button here, and so the user can click it, but the next button at the moment doesn't really do anything, right? We didn't add an event like we did with our start button. So let's add an event with our next button. We'll say next button dot add event listener and click. Again, we have another callback function. When you're building a JavaScript web app, you're going to have a million callback functions. It's not the prettiest way to write code, but it is something that you'll see a lot, so it's good to be aware of. So what we want to do is pretty similar to the start button. We want to load the next question, but we also want to disable the next button. So it's almost exactly the same. I'm going to say next button dot class list dot add disable, and we know that when the user answers a question again, that will re-enable the next button, so we're not too worried about that. But then we also have to move to the next question, so let's do that. So, well, actually, okay, we could either do it in the next button or we could do it down here. Let's just do it in the next button. Since it is the next button, it's going to create the next question. So we'll say if questions, if current question is less than questions.length minus 1. So we do want to know that there's other questions left. Then we say current question plus plus. So we'll go to the next question. And then we also have to remove the current question. So let's do that first. So we're just going to say, well, there's an easy way to do this. The kind of cheap way to do this is just to say quiz container dot inner HTML equals empty string. This is like a hacky way to remove quiz HTML. There's better ways to do it, but like we could have the question remove itself, but this is actually a pretty easy way to clear everything, and it's not going to delete this question. So if we wanted to start from scratch, it would still exist. We're just removing it from the HTML. I wonder if there's a less hacky way to do that. JS element remove children. So let's see what this says. So they're saying the same thing. It's option 1A. Okay, simple but not suitable for higher performance applications. That sounds like what we're doing. Option 1B, clear text content. This is kind of the same thing. According to MDN, this will be faster. Okay, so if it's faster, we might as well do that. Text content. It doesn't really matter. I don't think we're really worried about performance. Looping over every last child. I don't really want to do that. Looping to remove. Okay. So this is definitely telling me that what we're doing is the easiest thing to do for the moment. So let's give it a try. So we'll start the quiz, answer the question, go to the next question. Very cool. So we have what is 2 plus 2, 2 times 2, and we have our answers. We still see this like correct here. So we might want to change that to something. Let's just change that to, what did it say at the beginning? Click to start the quiz. Oh, we should actually update this message. So let's just say message.text content, choose an answer, exclamation point for no real reason, choose an answer. Okay. It kind of feels like this should actually be at the bottom of our quiz, but let's ignore that for now. So we choose an answer that's correct. Next question. So then let's do the same thing here. Now I'm starting to feel like these are the same thing, but that's okay. Okay. So start quiz, answer, next question, 2 times 2, correct. Notice that I didn't have to do anything else to make my other quiz questions work because we're using objects. Next question, choose an answer, that's correct. Next question, okay. So that works. We have a couple more things to do and we're almost done. So one thing we have to do is we have to decide what happens at the very end. And then we also need to, what was I gonna do? Oh, we need to shuffle our answers. So let's decide the end first and then we'll shuffle the answers. So if we go through each question, didn't remove, oh, because it still goes to next question. So let's actually change this a bit. So let's say load next question is only if there is a next question. Okay, so let's say if there are more questions, so then we're gonna increase the current question and load the next question. If there aren't any, let's change the message. So I'll also put this message guy in here. I'll put this guy up here, just so our logic is all down here. So if we're at the end of the quiz, let's just say message.textContent and say, nice work. And we'll give them a score. So we'll work on the score in a moment. Let's test that first. So start quiz, correct. Nope. Nope. Nice work. I guess for our last question, we don't want it to say next question again. We want it to say like get score. So let's make one more button for that. You could have one button that you just change the text with, but this will be a little bit easier. So let's call this the end button, and we'll say get your score. I don't know why I'm using all caps, but whatever. So then on the app, let's copy and paste. So then we have the end button, get end. And so actually this will be nice because then we can move some of this stuff to the end button. So we're gonna say, so if there's still a next question, oh, but then our logic kind of goes down here into question answered. That's okay. So we'll move some of this stuff down here. So, okay, so let's actually move our logic down into the question answered. So if there are more questions, then we want to see the next button. And if there's not, then we want to see the end button. So I'm just going to copy this and change this to end button. And that'll actually be nice because then we can differentiate these functionalities a little bit. So now we'll have end button dot add event listener click. And so we'll clear the quiz content again. We'll remove the end button. This is for next question, so we can leave current question ++ and load next question and choose an answer. And then for here, we'll give them their score, so that'll look good. So this is a little simpler actually in a way. Okay, so let's give that a try. So we'll start the quiz. Next question, get your score. Okay, so then let's do the score. So that's actually a bit simpler because now we can differentiate where we are in the quiz when we answer the question. And then we have the next button always doing one thing and the end button is always doing one thing, so we don't have to ask to do one thing or another. So that actually looks a little bit better in terms of how we want our code to be set up. I'm gonna get rid of this guy. And it's a little bit easier to read too, right? Start button starts the quiz, next button goes to the next question, end button ends the quiz, and we'll give the score. So let's make a score variable. So I'll just put this up here. I'll say let score equals 0. And so if they get it right, which is down here, if they answered the question and it's correct, we'll say score ++, very simple. And then at the end, their score is dependent on what score number is over how many questions there are. So we can add, well, actually, we don't necessarily want to say next work. So let's just start with the score. So we'll say you got plus score plus out of plus questions.length. So we know the total number of questions is questions.length. Adding a bunch of strings together here, we're saying you got plus score plus out of plus questions.length. And I'm using little spaces here just to format it. And then we'll say plus exclamation point, I guess. That's one way to do it. There's another way to do it using a string literal, which you guys may not have seen before, but it is pretty standard these days. So I'm just going to show what that looks like. So for string literal, you actually use backticks. Which you may not have used before unless you've like written Markdown or something like that. But the backtick is basically the key next to the 1 on your keyboard on the left, like all the way to the left. And usually you use it for like a tilde. But if you don't do shift, then it's a backtick. And so in JavaScript, you can write a string literal by using backticks instead of quotation marks. And then you can put variables inside of the string, which makes it easier to write. So you can say you got score out of, and so each time you want a variable, you use the $ and then these curly brackets. So that's like a shorthand to put in variables. And so this way you don't have to use all those pluses. So I don't always cover this, but I think you guys can handle it. I'll just leave this here, but I think this is good. So we'll start the quiz. Correct, correct, correct. I got 3 out of 3. Pretty good. And of course, if you wanted to add something else, you could do something based on the score. So you could say like if score equals 0, you know, message dot text content plus equals better luck next time, something like that. You know, if I get them all wrong, then it'll say that at the end. So if you want to add extra messaging at the end, you can do it like that. You can just add to text content, or you could make a variable and put it at the beginning here. With the formatting, I could put a space here, or I could put a space here, whatever you want. But yeah, you guys can, then you would just say else if score equals 1, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to fill all that out. You guys can do that if you want. And so we're almost done with everything we need to do for the functionality. The last thing is that you guys have probably noticed that every answer is the first one. That's not very useful for a quiz. Be pretty easy to figure that out eventually. So how do we shuffle the answers? There's a few different ways to approach this. So let's go back to our question class. So we added our answer div here, and we added our options here. So now what we want to do is we want to shuffle them randomly for each question. There are different ways to approach this. One thing that's nice is that we are using HTML. And because we're using HTML, if we assign a child somewhere else, it's going to remove the child from the children and put it somewhere else. So there's an easy way to do this. I just looked this up online, tried a few different options, and this is the simplest one. It's a little bit nutty looking, but I'll try to explain everything as we go. So we're going to shuffle our options randomly. What we're going to do is we're going to work backwards through our array and just move the children around. And the reason that we're working backwards rather than forwards is because we don't want to change the length of the array as we're looping over it, which is what's going to happen if we go forwards. Because if you look at it, if we say for let I equals 0, I is less than answers.length, which is the div that has our children in it. Actually, it's answers.children.length. You can see that when I is 0, if we change something about these children, and then we go back to the beginning, we're recalculating children.length. So an easy way to not do that is to start at children.length and then go backwards. So we'll say let I equals answers.children.length. And so the children includes both the right answer and the 2 wrong answers. If we look at our HTML, So if we look at our HTML, you can see for one question, for the answers, the children includes 1, 2, 3 options. So the right one and then the 2 wrong ones. So all the children are the same, so we can shuffle them as though they're the same thing. So we'll start at the end of the array, and then as long as I is greater than or equal to 0, we'll keep going, and we'll go I minus minus down through the array. Let's get a random index. So we're going to say let index equal math.floor. So we need to use math.floor because for an index, we need a whole number. We can't use like a floating point. So we need to round off the floating point. And since we're starting at children.length, which is 3, we want to round to 2, 1, or 0, not up to 3. So math.floor, if it's 2.5, it'll be 2. If it's 1.8, it'll be 1. If it's 0.9, it'll be 0. So it just cuts off whatever the remainder is. So we'll say math.floor, math.random, and then we'll multiply by I. So then we'll say let child equal answers at index, and then we'll say answers.append child. So this is a little confusing because of the way it's written, but it's actually very clever, and I'll try to explain why. So let's first talk about this part, math.random, math.floor. So we have our questions array, so let's use that as an example. So questions.length is 3. You could also sort your questions if you wanted to do that as well. Math.random times questions.length is going to be somewhere between 0 and 3. So you can see 1.2, 1.8, 2.1, 0.9, 0.19. So that's great. That gives us a random number. But we can't use a floating point as an index for a value. If I say questions at 1.1, that doesn't mean anything. Floating points are not used as indexes. What I need, oh, actually I misspelled questions at 1.1. Okay, so what I need is just a whole number. So to get a whole number from a floating point number, I can round it. And I want to round down because I'm starting at questions.length, which is 3, but the indexes start at 0. So I only have 0, 1, or 2 as options for my indexes. So what I'm going to say instead is math.floor, math.random. So now it's 0, 0, 1, 2. So I get a random index that I can actually use. So what math.floor does is it cuts off the floating points. So if it's like 2.5, it's going to be 2. If it's 2.9, it's still going to be 2. If it's 2.1, it's going to be 2. It just cuts off the end of this. It's called floor because we go down to 2 rather than going up to 3 or whatever number is there. So that's how we get the random index. And then we get a child. And so basically what we're doing, it's a bit confusing, but let's say this is our array for our answers and we have option 1, option 2, option 3. So we start at 3 and we get a random number. So that random number is going to be somewhere between 0 and 3. The highest it could be is like something like 2.99 blah, blah, blah. So if we floor that, we're going to get 2. Remember, this is 0, 1, 2. So if we get 2, we're going to take this option and then we're going to append it to our answers. So literally it's just going to stay in the same place. Okay. But if it was 0, then we take this guy and put that at the end. So then we'd get a new order. So that was 3. Then we do minus minus. We get 2. So that's either going to be 0 or 1. And that gets shuffled to the end. Then we do it one more time. That's either going to be, that's only going to be 0. So then 0 gets shuffled to the end. And so that at that point, you have a shuffled array where really anything is possible. You could end up with any order. You could have shuffled, this one first. You could have shuffled this one first. You could have shuffled this one first. But you're going to shuffle 3 times no matter what actually happens. So it's a little bit confusing, but it is a very clever method that I found when I was researching how to shuffle an array. Hopefully we will find that this works. Oh, I have one error, which is I didn't do this correctly. I need to say .children here because I am going through the children even though I'm appending them to the answers there. Okay, so now this one was still the first one. This one was still the first one. This one was not, so it actually worked. Okay, let's try it again. So now this one is the right answer, and this one is the right answer, and this one is the right answer. So it does appear to be random. One thing about randomness is it's hard to test because it is random. So when you see patterns, you start to think that's not random. We also really don't have very many questions, so it's going to be hard for it to seem random since there aren't that many options. But yeah, that seems to work. I think that's everything we need to do. Hopefully this wasn't too crazy. This is like 50 lines of code. This is 75-ish. So there's kind of a lot going on here. Let me know if you have any issues or you get confused by anything, but hopefully this should be easy enough to follow. So yeah, that's it for this video. I'm gonna create a thumbnail for this one. I don't want to use the same thumbnail because we want to show that we are improving our process. So let's do an answered question. And I'm just going to get rid of the console and do this and take a little screenshot. And so then I'll go to downloads and put this, or no, this is going to be on desktop. I'll put this screenshot in there. And we'll call this thumbnail. It's a PNG. So let's add that link to our main page. So I'm going to get rid of all these guys, go to index.html, and I'm kind of putting these at the top now. So I'm going to copy this and paste. And everything here is the same except I'm just adding 2. And so this is quiz project. We added the question class. That's the main thing we changed here. So I'll put that there. And let's check out our portfolio page. Okay, so now we have quiz project document object model, quiz project question class. I guess I can put like number 1 here and number 2 here. That looks pretty good. Oh, I got a 1 out of 3. Not very good, but that's okay. So yeah, that's everything I need to update. I'm gonna close this, close Sublime, get rid of this guy. So we have our changes here. Everything looks good. So I'm gonna say adds quiz part 2 and commit to master and push to origin. So that's it for this video. Let me know if you have questions. You can email me, you can message me on Discord, or you can ask me in class.